Hello. Uh, Welcome to our webinar, Black Indigenous Narratives in Media. My name is Lee. I am the Associate Manager of the Indigenous Reporters Program at JHR, and very excited to be here today and to be able to share with you the discussion that you're about to be a part of. A couple things I need to say off the front. First of all, unfortunately, our moderator, Adrian Harwood, who very much wanted to be here, was called away due to some unforeseen and unavoidable work circumstances. And so unfortunately, Adrian will not be moderating today, but instead the wonderful Brandi Morin will be joining us. So a huge thanks to Brandi for stepping up on very short notice. And I'm sure everyone will appreciate Brandi's skillful moderating as well. And Adrian, with any luck, will be joining us near the end of the discussion. And our panelists, Oscar Baker III, Ann Marie Beals, and Etanda Arden, are all fabulous people. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy the discussion with them. I want to say thank you to all of them as well for being here and for being part of this. And again, big thank you to Brandi for stepping up at the last minute. Our executive director, Rachel Pulfer, also wanted to be here and say a few words off of the beginning of this event today, and was called away because her kids are homesick. And so in particular, Rachel just wanted me to highlight some of the amazing work and the long relationship that we've had with Oscar over the course of many years. Oscar's done internships with us and scholarships and fellowships, and he's been a guest editor for us, and he's been on a few panels now, and we're just so grateful always for your wonderful contributions, Oscar. And Adrian, who's not here as well, is also a member of our board, and just Rachel asked me to shout him out on that. And Etanda was a participant in our community media training online over the last year, so there's a lot of people here today who have been a part of JHR's programs over the years, and Brandi as well was a trainer in that same program, and just really very happy and grateful for everyone's contributions. So that's enough, I think. We've heard enough of me speaking, and we can get to the meat of the discussion. Again, to everyone who's here, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you learn a lot and really appreciate this discussion. Thank you. Hi, Brandi.
Taniki. Tanze, everybody. Thank you for being here today. So I am very excited to introduce you today, our panelists. We have Oscar Baker III. Oscar is Black and Mi'kmaq from Elsipogtog First Nation. He is currently working as a freelance journalist, there he is, and home worker from his home in Indian Island First Nation. He has 7 years experience in media and has worked in just about every medium. He has bylines for the Cape Breton Post and the CBC, among others, and was a Journalist for Human Rights Indigenous Fellow at the Walrus. Welcome, Oscar. Next, we have Etanda Arden. Etanda is a Black Indigenous woman who is a long-time resident of Thunder Bay, Ontario. She's an emerging writer who would like to use writing to create space for herself, as well as other disenfranchised people. She has recently published a piece titled Writing Myself into Existence, an essay on the erasure of Black Indigenous identity in Canadian education. Welcome, Etanda.
Thank you.
And now we have Ann Marie Beals. Ann Marie Beals is a two-spirit Indigenous Black Lehenue, a mixed blood African Nova Scotian and First Nation Mi'kmaq from the territory of Mi'kmaq. Ann Marie is a graduate student at Wilfrid Laurier University and a story sharer working on the proclaimingourroots.com project. Stories from this project revolve around Afro-Indigenous identity and relationships with Indigenous and Black communities. Their research explores the health and well-being of their communities and looking at the effects of colonial legacies of oppression and violence and lack of acknowledgement of Indigenous Black identity in the settler nation state known as Canada. Ann Marie shares Afro-Indigenous voices in uplifting the sacred stories of strength, self-assertion, and consciousness raising through the lived experiences and knowledges loudly resonating in Indigenous Black communities. Wow, what a panel we have today. Welcome, welcome. So Ann, I would like to please start with you and ask you to please spend some time talking about the history of Black and Indigenous peoples.
Avalon Brandi, and thank you. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently a visitor on the traditional territories of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, and I recognize these unceded territories. I'm grateful to be welcomed to these lands, Walalan. So in giving more of a historical perspective around Indigenous Black identity, I lean heavily on my experiences in Nova Scotia and working with communities in Halifax and Toronto, but I will touch on other places and spaces as well. In gatherings of mixed blood Indigenous Black peoples, Afro-Indigenous peoples, and urban Black natives, a main concern for us is the erasure of our presence. It's like Indigenous Black peoples don't even exist, yet here we are. In revealing historical erasure as a form of colonization, I emphasize the histories and experiences of mixed blood Indigenous Black people and communities are not written about in Canadian school history textbooks. We do not see ourselves reflected in media and public discourse, yet we have existed on unceded Indigenous lands in the settler nation state known as Canada for over 400 years. And for the purposes of my conversation, for the most part, Indigenous refers to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. However, I must make clear that mixed blood Indigenous Black people are Indigenous to Turtle Island and Indigenous to the lands of continental Africa and the Caribbean and other Indigenous territories on Mother Earth. Excuse me. As well, there are peoples on Northern Turtle Island that are from various Indigenous Black nations, such as the Seminoles, the Pequot, the Creek, and Cherokee, who are more visible in the United States to a certain extent, but are still fighting for recognition of identity within their nations. And to note, as a mixed blood Indigenous Black person, I do not consider myself to be Métis, as the Métis nation is specific in its geographic regions and nationhood. Though some takes a literal French translation of Métis as mixed blood and sovereignty, I do not, as I am not of the Métis nation. However, some Indigenous Black people are Métis. I share a snippet from Bertrand Bickerstaff, a professor of communications at Old College, who has been researching the Black fur trade history in Alberta. This is from the Edmonton Journal, and a shout out to Kayla for sharing. He writes that Joseph Lewis, who was a Black fur trader living in Alberta from 1799 to 1820, married a First Nations woman and had 3 children. His children moved to Red River and married into the Métis community. So we are diverse and hold ancestry within First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. And I may, throughout this conversation, use descriptors such as Indigenous Black and Afro-Indigenous and urban Black native from Bonita Lawrence, delineating those of us who did not grow up or live on reserve, but in urban centers. So I am mixed blood African Nova Scotian Mi'kmaq. And I say this as Indigenous Black peoples are not a monolith. We are not homogeneous. We are diverse in how we come to be, like mixed from Nunavut in Jamaica or Cree and Yoruba, so as not to be pigeonholed or stereotyped. So why don't we hear more about Indigenous Black peoples in settler Canada? Well, to start, historically, record keeping sometimes was simply not done or done very shoddily. In Nova Scotia, historical census taking reveals Indigenous Black people recorded as mulatto, thus erasing Indigenous identity. In some cases, Indigenous women with mixed blood children moved to Black communities to hide their children from Indian agents so that they could not be forcibly removed to the residential school in Shubenacadie. Sometimes Indigenous Black identity was hidden so that children were not removed from their homes to attend the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children. For some mixed blood families, to hold Indigenous blood in one's veins was seen as potential harm. So to deny Indigenous ancestry was a matter of survival, given ongoing genocide perpetuated by colonizers to erase Mi'kmaq people from their lands to support expansionism and capitalism. So even within families and communities, Indigenous blood was not always shared when the stories were told. But invariably, we always have to come back to colonization, because the colonial project runs on its mythical racial hierarchy, and it became difficult for settlers to classify mixed Indigenous Black people, as often the authenticity of nativeness was challenged. Colonial rule, such as written into the Indian Act, uses blood quantum to assess how native one is as a tool of assimilation in designating how much native blood one must hold in one's body to be considered Indigenous to Turtle Island. And the one-drop rule, used to determine how much Black blood one body holds, was used as continuation of the system of slavery and oppression and subjugation. One drop of Black blood and you're chattel property and designated inferior status. With the lack of recognition of Indigenous Black identity, some Afro-Indigenous people feel like we have to choose one side or the other. Either you're Black or you're Indigenous. And then actively move to cover up one side of your identity, as the racism faced depends on how one phenotypically or characteristically looks. This is what we found in our work in Halifax and Toronto around Indigenous Black identity. Even in 2021, people who present phenotypically as Black, regardless of the blood mix, are assigned inferior minority status and are treated as such. While the closer one looks to normalized whiteness, the more one is assigned superior status, to which the rest of us are supposed to subscribe. You see, a mixed Indigenous Black identity manifests differently in the settler nation state because when Indigenous and white blood are mixed, settler society has no problem claiming mixed white and Indigenous identity if the mix moves Canada society that much closer to whiteness. Because we live in a white settler hegemony and assimilation has always been a colonial strategy to remove Indigenous peoples off their territories. So such a mix is more acceptable and inferior status is not necessarily assigned. So for mixed blood Indigenous Black peoples, though we are diverse, we find commonalities in understanding the pain and trauma on both sides of our families and communities and how we are the survivors of our ancestors. We take great pride in who we are and appreciate the resilience in that we are still here to tell our stories. No one is going to stop us. We are raising a critical consciousness, so journalists, beware. You will be hearing a lot more about us. And you can start by checking out the video stories created as digital storytelling that I am shamelessly plugging for our website, proclaimingourroots.com. I would also recommend the writings of Bonita Lawrence for further education and understanding of Indigenous Black identity. So, Walalin, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Ann Marie. Wow. So, Oscar, you have, family in Mi'kmaq territory, as well as, a Black family in Florida. I was wondering if you could talk about the Black Seminoles in Florida and what you know about that and what their experience has been and is.
Okay. Well, the Black Seminoles, I came across a YouTube video by Weird History that spoke about how this historical group fought wars together. So the Black Seminoles were made up of free Blacks and runaway slaves who integrated into the Seminole society and helped fight the Seminole Indian Wars against the United States government down in Florida. And that history was never taught in the curriculum while I attended St. Augustine, or school in St. Augustine, Florida. I spent 8 years in Florida. That's where my father's family is from my middle school and high school, and we were never taught about it. And I wanted to bring that discussion up because so much of the history of Indigenous people is hidden, but also the relationship shared between Black and Indigenous people is hidden also. And part of the Weird History video, they explained that a lot of the slave-owning plantation owners had the newspapers hide that history of that shared struggle against colonization, because they didn't want the slaves that they had owned to know that Black and Indigenous nations were working together to combat the colonial government. So in many ways, this is a topic that I bring up because of, like the two other panelists mentioned, the erasure of our history, and how that plays in today. Growing up as a Mi'kmaq and Black man from Elsipogtog First Nation and having this dual identity, I thought I was the only one. My sister shares the same bloodlines as me, having a Black father, a Mi'kmaq mother. But when I looked around in my specific reserve, I didn't see anyone like me. I grew up most of my life thinking that my identities were some anomaly, that I didn't understand the rich history of our relationships. And it's not until I got older that I started to realize that I wasn't alone. I took part in an Afro-Indigenous gathering a couple of years ago, hosted by Keisha, where I met Ann Marie. And it was so beautiful to know that there were people with Black and Indigenous histories from all over. I got to meet people, who were Cree and Jamaican, who were Anishinaabe and Nigerian, and it was so comforting to know that you're not alone in this world. And I think it's important that more of media share our stories to let those people who are growing up in more homogenous groups with people who don't look like them, to know that they're not alone, that there are some shared experiences. I won't share all the stories, but I know overwhelmingly a lot of that gathering, people were sharing how, like myself, I felt more Indigenous in one setting in Elsipogtog and kind of more Black in Florida. And it's the feeling of not feeling complete. But
did you ever feel like you had to maybe choose one over the other? Was it in regards to, identifying with or your culture? Did it ever, come to that?
I don't know how to place that, because it's still like a personal journey. It's still accepting both identities. For example, being Black passing, I felt so uncomfortable enjoying some of the Indigenous or Mi'kmaq medicines that we hold. If I wore a ribbon shirt, how quickly would the people around me question my indigeneity, my Mi'kmaq-ness? And it wasn't until my mother's death, unfortunately, that I started really embracing some of the Mi'kmaq side of myself. And a lot of my elders, my personal elders like Ron Tremblay and Mi'kmaq said, Wes, you may feel that you're part Black or part Mi'kmaq, but you're all of you, and that's enough. And you have the ancestry. You should feel comfortable using our medicine. So I smudge mostly every day now. It's still a journey of accepting who I am in both realities. but having to choose one over the other, I don't think that's where I'm at in life, or I don't know if I've ever had to feel that question internally. It's more of just accepting who I am and knowing that.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Oscar. I'm going to ask Etanda now, because you wrote about this in your piece. What can you relate to what Oscar's saying here, and even Ann Marie coming into your own as an Indigenous Black woman? Do you hear anything after listening to Oscar that, you know, reminds you of a little bit of your struggle, or where are you at with that? If you could please share with us.
I can relate to feeling like I'm the only one. Because my internet connection is unstable. Yeah, where I grew up here in Thunder Bay, there's not a lot of Black people to begin with. And also I was the only Black person in my family. So I had a really hard time figuring out where I fit within my family. This side of me right away. So I felt like that kind of pushed me into the margins.
And where are you at now with your journey of reclaiming, you know, that, and with your Indigenous identity and your Black identity, and just like, you know, intersecting the two? Where are you at with that? It's a continual journey.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just working up the courage to even talk about it. Like I've held a lot of shame about it. So even just saying it out loud is difficult, but I think necessary in the healing process.
Because I think a lot of people are in your place. You know what I mean? There are a lot of others out there that are Black Indigenous. Like I have cousins that are, or, you know, I know of many people that are, and they, you know, often wonder, you know, where they fit in, or how, you know, how to go about that, and wonder why they're not seen, represented, right?
Exactly.
Even just a few years ago, I was reporting on a story in Calgary, and I met this incredible woman there. She's Black in Tuscarora from North Carolina in the States. And I was just fascinated with her story. And she was like powwow dancing. And she's, I think, almost 70 now. But her story and the history of her people there are incredible. They were, you know, slaves that intermarried with the Tuscarora there, and they hid out in the, you know, in the forests, and they survived, you know, all their line survived up until now. And I was just like fascinated, and you know, still want to go there and do that kind of story, and more of that needs to be, you know, shared. I totally agree. So what do you guys have to say about that, about the importance of representation in the media? Why do you think there's a lack of it, and why do we need more of? I'll start with Ann Marie.
Well, I mean, just being erased is never a good feeling. If you feel like you don't belong, and if you don't see yourself reflected in, like, for children and youth growing up, and they don't see themselves reflected in the school books where they're learning, they don't see themselves reflected in media, in a myriad of ways of things that we're doing, it can be very harmful, and it's oppressive as well, this kind of erasure. So, and I guess it's a second part that I might add to that, and, you know, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I believe that mainstream media in particular is concentrated in a small group of people that have an agenda to push forward a neo-colonial kind of a neoliberal kind of agenda that doesn't really suit the sharing of stories for Indigenous Black people. So I think whose story gets told historically and contemporarily really is decided upon who is in control, who has the power to share the stories. So yeah, I think it's a kind of two-pronged thing. And that's why we do, you know, the work that we do, because we need to raise up the voices of Indigenous Black people, because it's important for our children. It's important for our children to see themselves reflected.
So can we talk now about the shared struggle against colonial oppression between Black and Indigenous peoples? So is it a double whammy kind of thing? Oscar, you had said in the pre-interview that you sometimes consider yourself doubly oppressed, but also doubly blessed. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I say it as a joke to my friends and sometimes my partner. Double the oppression, double the fun. I talk about that because, unfortunately, I operate a lot with people who want to play the oppression Olympics, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, who had it worse, the slaves or the residential school survivor? And I heard it's been prominent throughout my young adult life, and more so after the George Floyd killing. A lot of people in my Mi'kmaq community saying, well, what about us? And both of those issues are mean a lot to me. I mean, I'm Black and Mi'kmaq. I still wear my missing and murdered Indigenous women's pendant for my Sugi Gladys, my aunt. She went missing in 2004, and they discovered her body in 2012. And it's hard when you have family members asking why you're choosing sides, and I tell them that this isn't something that I'm removed from. I'm living it. I feel it. I don't want to have to choose between the oppressions that my family face and feel. To present as a Black man is dangerous. It is something that, even as a reporter, I was working as the Indigenous Affairs reporter at the time during the start of this pandemic. And I told them, I'm Black. I'm a Black man. I don't feel comfortable going out with a mask covering on because somebody might think I'm trying to rob them. And on the other hand, my partner is Mi'kmaq, my sisters are Mi'kmaq, and one is Mi'kmaq and Black, and I feel the genocide oppression of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I say that don't make me choose between these two things. Why can't we work together to solve them? And why is a conversation always, well, what about me? What about us? Can't we work together to further each other's pain and suffering? Because we're both struggling under these colonial conditions, and it's personal to me. It's not something that's abstract. This, I feel it deep down in my soul when I talk about these issues. So I say it as a joke, but that is usually how I say that a lot of Black and Indigenous people deal with some oppression and some pain. Laughter is medicine. So we joke about these things, but they're quite painful. And I only bring that up as a reminder that for some, it's not who has it worse. It's how do we work together to raise each other's voices and overcome these struggles, because some of us have both identities deep down and we feel it.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing so personally, Oscar. Ann Marie or Etanda, do you want to add to, speak to the power of allyship in this? Ann Marie?
Okay, I mean, I guess briefly I would say that we have to look at the common enemy here. It's not Indigenous peoples and it is not Black peoples, and this is the way that I think. But we need to fight against colonialism and imperialism because it affects everyone. And so it's not a matter of the oppression Olympics, it is a matter of fighting the common enemy, and that is the laws and policies that rule Indigenous and Black peoples in Northern Turtle Island at this point. And so that's kind of how I frame it in my mind. We're not each other's enemies, and nor should we, because the colonial project is very strong in insidiously working that narrative into our peoples and our communities, but that doesn't mean that is the way that it has to be. Coming together to fight the common enemy. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Etanda, given what's unfolded this past year with George Floyd's murder and the rising of Black Lives Matter and a cry for justice all around the world, you being Indigenous and Black, did you see a coming together of Indigenous and Black, like those allyships, those getting stronger at all, or what was your experience?
Yeah. People that yes and no, like on both sides. I've seen actually some of my family members were saying like some of the same things that Oscar was talking about, like what about us and what about our struggle, and like you're on Indigenous land but you're talking about this other struggle, and that was it's hard when you're both, because I can identify with both struggles. And like Ann Marie was saying, like we shouldn't, both groups plays into the divide and conquer method of colonization. And I think we're stronger together. Like you can't decolonize if you fight with other oppressed groups.
Yeah,
it works to oppress the other group as well as yourself.
So can we go back a little bit? Oscar, what is your experiencing? Have you had to work in your life to like prove or defend your identity? Like I know you talked about sometimes if you go to an event in a ribbon shirt, you look around and some people might look at you funny. Is this like a continual thing as a Black Indigenous person, to have to like defend your identity, and what's the psychological impact of that?
It's not something that I deal with specifically. I use that as an example because I spend so much time in my homelands. A lot of people know who I am, know who my family are, but I only bring that up because of some friends who shared experiences of having to prove that identity, of constantly having to show pictures of that family member who is Indigenous passing, or bringing up to folks of what ancestor is Indigenous. Sorry, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts on this. I just to say that it's not something that I experience a lot of in my daily life, but I'm different. Like I mentioned or before, there's such a different collective of Afro-Indigenous people that our experices are wide ranging.
And so what about you, Etanda, then? Sorry. Have you experienced that, where you've had to prove, like in the community that you've grown up? Because Oscar has spent a lot of time like right on his First Nation and stuff, whereas you've been, you were raised more in like an urban kind of setting.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. That I don't live in my homelands, and I also don't live on Couchiching, which is the First Nation I was adopted into. So yeah, I always feel very insecure about my Indigenous identity and where I fit, and feeling like I have to continuously prove myself to people.
But how proud are you to have, such incredible like culture and history and power in your veins of both your Indigenous ancestors and your Black ancestors, right? it's a sense of, it must be also a sense of extreme pride. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I definitely feel pride for both sides. That was a journey to get to, though, to be honest. Like when I was younger, I grew up here. Being Black and looking Black was a really big deal. So I didn't even talk about it. I would not even admit to being Black. I didn't want to talk about it or anything. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older, maybe around 11 or 12, where like the hip hop culture became popular amongst my friends. And then all of a sudden it was okay for me to be Black, like out loud. So yeah, it's constantly confusing for me how I can be a whole person.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so Ann Marie, we're getting some feedback there. I'm wondering if you could give us some advice about decolonizing the media and how we can better cover Black Indigenous stories.
I think, as I'm not a journalist myself, but I think I would go back to looking at ways of being and knowing respect, relationships, and reciprocity. Whereas sometimes I feel like people in the media just expect automatically that because they are there, that we should be forthcoming in the giving of our stories and the giving of our knowledge without any kind of relationship being built or without any kind of reciprocity involved in the process. It's not just about the extraction of knowledge, it's about building relationships in Indigenous Black communities, knowing Afro-Indigenous people, and being respectful of not taking, but also giving back. So as someone who's not a journalist, but works with communities, that's one of the things that we really, these are the things that we focus on. Be respectful, build those relationships, and practice reciprocity in giving back and not just taking. Yeah.
And thank you. Can I ask you? Yes. Can I ask you about the Métis terminology? Because some people just use that as a blanket term, like you had stated already. What is the correct terminology for people to learn? I mean, I would ask that specific person who I am interviewing, but is it called Black? Are you called Black Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous? Is there an umbrella term, or what is your advice on that in general?
Actually, you know what, Oscar, if you don't mind, because you had some really good thoughts on this, would you mind sharing regarding that?
Yeah. During our pre-panel discussion, I mentioned that as Black and Indigenous people have often been defined so often by other people throughout our colonial history. I, as a journalist, usually ask specifically how they identify. So I usually say that I'm Black and Mi'kmaq. Others who are Mi'kmaq might say they're Ilnu. So it's just asking them specifically who they identify as. I know when we talk about Métis, we specifically, there's a confusion, across Canada of thinking it means mixture when it means the Métis Nation and the descendants of the Red River Treaty signees. I personally would just use the language that they identify with, but probably give people a heads up that they're going to face some backlash, at least as a news organization from the communities. If you use Métis here in Mi'kma'ki, you're certainly going to hear from Mi'kmaq communities saying there are no Métis here because of the Eastern Woodland Métis and other groups who use that terminology to say that they're mixed with Mi'kmaq. And Mi'kmaq communities generally will say, if you're mixed with Mi'kmaq, you're Mi'kmaq. Stop saying you're Métis, because that term is used for a specific nation, and they,
Yeah.
unless that nationhood members had moved here, they wouldn't have specifically come from this location.
Hi, thank you. Yes.
And
I
Brandi, may I add, just as
Yeah.
as a point, that as well, in public discourse going on right now in Northern Turtle Island, that there are white people who are trying to usurp a Mi'kmaq a nationhood by claiming to be Métis from an ancestor back in the 1800s and claiming to be Métis and using that as a way to avail themselves on various resources that should be going to Mi'kmaq people. So that's kind of like a counter discourse, I guess, that's happening in regards to settlers trying to steal land and trying to steal resources. So there's also that happening in regards to the use of the term Métis, which has nothing to do with the Métis Nation.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Now, I have a question regarding advice to young aspiring Black Indigenous journalists and writers. Who would like to go first? Oscar, I'm volunteering you.
Voluntold, for sure. I was just trying to find my mute button. Or unmute button, sorry. The advice that I got in the early stages of my career were to get out there, to write. We need you in these newsrooms. We need your perspectives. Write often. Always try and improve, but know that you have allies. Reach out to established journalists in this business. I know early on, journalists like Connie Walker and Duncan McHugh and Tim Fontaine have meant wonders for my career, just to let me know that this industry is very white, that there are some problems in newsrooms when you look around and you don't feel like you belong there, but our stories need to be told. And I know one of the topic points that maybe we didn't have enough time for was about objectivity. But I think that our viewpoints allow us to ask the right questions in a trauma-informed way. So when I take on stories that are deeply traumatic and troubling when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, I'm not speaking from a place of privilege or outside of that. I know the pain, the continuous pain and trauma. So when I'm talking to those families about that issue, my own experience can inform me of, well, what's the right kind of questions to ask during that time? And if you're like coming from the backgrounds that we do, being marginalized, Black identities and Indigenous identities, I think we have learned that the pain it feels to go unheard. And it's powerful to, as a journalist, to open up those opportunities and listen to people who have been unheard for so long. And that is a great skill that you have developed. I know I can't speak for all Indigenous nations, but I know here in Mi'kmaq, Ilnu, and have been storytellers since time immemorial. And those are skills that you have. It's in your blood. I know. And feel free to reach out to me, or I can't speak for Brandi, but hopefully you can reach out to her or other, Black or Indigenous journalists. Just give them a heads up. Hey, I want to get into industry. I'm a little scared, but we're here to offer advice and here to cheer you on. One of the disadvantages that I hope we can help to overcome together is the lack of networking. So many of my white journalist colleagues have had family members who were journalists before, and I look at my own family, and most of them have just struggled to survive. So I hope that, you know, as we grow together, that we can network and learn about each other, and hopefully open up doorways for each other. Walalan.
Hi. Etanda, do you have some advice for up and coming writers, journalists?
Advice? I feel like I'm the one that needs advice. I'm pretty new to writing and to the journalism world. But yeah, I would agree with Oscar. Just keep writing, keep telling, sharing your stories, because the more of us that do that, like the more representation that will there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Ann Marie, do you have some advice for up and coming writers or journalists or researchers?
I mean, I think both Oscar and Etanda said it. Let's just keep on writing and learning. I think learning is an ongoing journey and informs how and what one writes. I mean, as I say, I'm not a journalist. I'm a community health researcher, and so I write in a kind of an academic style. But I think it's important also to write in a way that speaks to your people. So so learn the histories, learn how we came to be where we are, and translate that as the sharing of stories, because I believe that the sharing of stories really is what will aid in decolonizing this land. So the more stories we have, the better. So write those stories, share those stories.
Yes, hi. So I'm just going to see, we should be having a guest, a surprise pop-in guest joining us shortly here. I'm just waiting to hear from Lee to see if that is still happening. So while I'm waiting for that question, Oscar, do you have any advice for people that are first starting out and like how to pitch stories or where to pitch to, and if they're afraid, like if they're feeling intimidated as a new young journalist?
I was surprised at how responsive some people could be. So just as a freelancer, I think it's important to understand that a lot of editors have a bit of a rapport with writers before they assign stories. But my best advice to you is to look at different outlets that you've always wanted to write for. Go on the masthead and find out who the managing editors are, who the who the editors are, and find out and pitch them directly. Sometimes the pitch submissions emails are just a slush pile, and a lot of things can get lost. But it's almost like working as a salesperson. And just let them know what perspectives you can bring to their organization, what stories you see are lacking in their coverage, and ones that you'd want to tell. So you're kind of working as like a solutions person of like, okay, this is a gap in coverage. So maybe the panelist and or me, for example, would be like, hey, this organization is really lacking in coverage of Black and Indigenous people. I've noticed your coverage. You mainly offer perspectives of white passing Indigenous people. I think it's important that you show Black passing Indigenous people. And here is a person I think you should cover. This is how I will cover it well. And these are the different things that I can highlight in that coverage. So I think that's, I guess my advice would be to look at the organization you want to write for, look at their coverage, look at the stories that they typically tell, show the gaps, and show how you can fill that gap.
Yeah.
Also, I'm always open to helping you work those pitches, I guess, into concise, which I feel like I'm rambling, short, concise storytelling. One of my journalism profs always told me, whenever possible, because you're working in a storytelling industry, tell a great story. So I guess my advice is tell a great story about how you can be that change that you want to see in the coverage.
So I have something to just ask. It just popped in my head. It's curious. Do you know how many other Black Indigenous journalists there are around in Canada?
For me specifically?
Yeah.
I don't really know. I
don't know either. I think that's really cool.
Know like one other videographer, I think, worked for APTN on the West Coast, but unfortunately I never met them personally. Avalon Bird is a storyteller. She's based in Toronto. I think she's Anishinaabe and Black, and just did a freelance host for Sportsnet. But I don't think she identifies specifically as a journalist, but she's written a book. She's amazing. Great cousin of mine. Not really related, but you know how it is in the community.
So we should look her up. We should follow her then.
For sure.
Just wondering, Ann Marie, is there any like a community for Black Indigenous people somewhere? Is it dependent on their community? Where can somebody reach out if they're somewhere and they want to connect with others so that they don't feel as alone?
Yeah, there are a few Facebook groups. Not one is only started by myself. It's an Afro-Indigenous male-spirited group. It's more based on trying to heal some of the toxic masculinity and homophobia and transphobia that we've seen in community. I want to say that I believe it was Nino who started a Afro-Indigenous governance group on Facebook. But Ann Marie might have more resources. I know Proclaiming Our Roots is another avenue that people can go to hear stories of Afro-Indigenous people. But,
yeah, Ann Marie, can you explain to us a little bit more? You just sort of touched on it. What is Proclaiming Our Roots?
So Proclaiming Our Roots was a project started by my supervisor and mentor, Dr. Sian L. Wilson, and Anishinaabe Kwe Denise Baldwin, in thinking about why is it that we don't hear about Indigenous Black people. And so that was back in 2016. And as a researcher, Sian was able to get some funding to start the Proclaiming Our Roots project. So we went to Halifax, we went to Toronto and had weekend gatherings with people to teach and to learn how to create digital stories, capturing the stories of our communities and putting them on a video, and now they're shared on his website. And we're also looking to move that into other parts of northern Turtle Island, like we want to go out west, and also into Quebec to gather more stories from Indigenous Black communities. And that's the work that's ongoing right now. So as a way to get in touch would be through the proclaimingourroots.com website. There's some contact information there. So just hit us up. Because we're now going into, because of COVID, we had a project that was slated to go this summer, but we really felt that we just couldn't do it on Zoom. It just wasn't going to work because we need to be on the land or we need to be in person. So hopefully in the summer of 2022, we'll be gathering on Indigenous territory to collect more stories, and also to teach more people to go into their communities to learn how to capture more stories and put them out there for communities to see. So if anyone's interested in that, just hit us up again. There's an email on the website, and yeah. That's a way to connect.
So will that be expanding like to all of Turtle Island? Because I know there's a lot of Black Indigenous people in the States as well.
There is. And right now our focus is just on the North, but you know, you never know where this is also a journey. It's not like we might think of it as having this project and this project and this project, but it's more of a journey in expanding consciousness of Indigenous Black identity. And, you know, some of the people that we have gathered with have gone on to do some amazing things in that consciousness raising of Indigenous Black identity. So it's kind of like, it's a journey, but it's also like a mushroom that kind of expands out.
Yeah.
So yeah, to the south, definitely at some point, yeah.
Now, Etanda, you're way up in Thunder Bay. So how do you stay connected? What have you been able to do?
I was just thinking about that. There's not really a Black and Indigenous community up here. How I'm starting to make connections, because it's still really new, is it started with my essay and saying how I felt and getting that published. And then I had people reaching out to me. So I'm slowly starting to build a community, which is awesome.
And that's something that you really stepped out of yourself to write that essay, right? Was it something that you pushed yourself to do because you wanted to get that out and to be on this healing journey?
Yeah, it was really uncomfortable. I'm still uncomfortable with it, but it's been good. Like I realized that what I really lacked was community. So even that one essay, and I'm getting like all this positive feedback and making connections. So it's been awesome.
That is powerful. Well, so I just heard our special guest is unable to make it. He is a journalist who is probably chasing something breaking right now because it's work related. So Adrian Harwood, he won't be able to be joining us at the end. And JHR just wanted me to let the viewers know that they are having technical difficulties with the comments and questions, and they send their apologies. They're trying to fix it. So I think we are going to wrap this up. I just want to give you guys all a chance to say any ending parting words that you wish. And thank you so much for being here today. What an incredible, honoring conversation that I was blessed to be a part of at the last minute. And I'm so glad that I got to be here because this is something that I'm interested in and I want to chase and do these stories. So I myself have learned a lot, and I'm definitely going to be reaching out to all of you. I'm going to be checking out, proclaiming our roots and things like that. I highly recommend that you guys also check out Etanda's piece with the Yellowhead Institute. It's called Writing Myself into Existence. It's a really powerful piece with lots of insights regarding some of what we're talking about. So I'm going to offer the floor to anybody who would like to have some parting words, and then we're done.
I guess as we close this panel discussion, I would like to thank you all for taking the time to listen, to participate. Remember that decolonization is an action. It's an action word. That means that you actively have to decolonize. That doesn't mean just putting cutesy words like you're indigenizing the curriculum or the business. That actually means putting in some really hard work and looking deeply at some of the roots and of your organization or of yourself, of what have you internalized from the colonial structure that is putting so much weight on both sides of my family, the Black and Mi'kmaq side, and people who intersect with both identities. Also, if you're a media organization, remember I am a freelance journalist, so I am open for open for business. So hit me up sometime, and to the journalists out there hoping to come into this industry. My DMs and stuff are open too for any advice. Best of luck to you. Again, we need you in this industry. Yeah, much love to you all. Lauren.
Hi. And we're good. Any last parting words? Well, thank you again.
May I say something, or are we done? Oh, I just wanted to say, Alan, thank you to everybody, just kind of echoing Oscar's words in a sense, but really grateful to be with everyone on this panel, because I too have learned, and so it's a wonderful thing, and I hope that we get to do this again in different places and sharing the knowledge and learning. So Alan, to everyone.
Well,
I just want to say that I'm grateful and thankful to be asked to be a part of this panel. I've also learned a lot. So just want to express that. Well, thank you.
hi. May this be the start of many more of these types of public conversations and the birth of many